Sega has a history of excellence that spans back to the 8-bit era, but for every Sonic the Hedgehog and Streets of Rage, there are a number of infamous titles that stain the Nintendo rival's reputation. Are these supposed stinkers as bad as the critics claim? Let's find out as Innocent Until Proven Guilty brings a few of the worst Sega games ever made to trial. Released in 1994 from a collaboration by Sega and Artec Studios, Crystal's Ponytail is one of the biggest oddities in the vast Genesis library. The plot involves an evil witch's kidnapping scheme that we have to thwart by assuming the role of the titular character and rescuing her fellow ponies. The ensuing adventure is a simple scavenger hunt targeted towards the younger female demographic that's broken down into 3 interconnected elements for completing the quest. The horseshoes are the first and most common, functioning as a currency for crossing the gates into new sections. The keys unlock chests that contain additional supplies of the aforementioned item and serve as the primary means of acquiring the final piece of the puzzle, the gems. The gems are the rarest and trickiest ingredient of Crystal's Collectathon, as they're the ultimate tool for freeing our captured companions. There are 7 gems strategically scattered around each location, and they're guarded by a bevy of barriers from birds to spiders and beyond. These enemies act as a roadblock by removing horseshoes from our inventory, resulting in a potential failed mission objective and level restart, so it's of the utmost importance that we successfully defend against their attacks by unleashing a counter barrage of hoofed fury, which is accomplished by pressing either A or B. The hit detection for these rear kicks can be a bit wonky, but that's offset by it literally being impossible to die no matter how poorly you play, so all it takes is a willingness to stick it out until all of the gems are obtained, and doing so will display our beautiful trophies in the brackets at the bottom of the screen. These brackets are later transformed upon coming into contact with a series of structures over the course of Crystal's journey. Pressing A or B in front of these while selecting the corresponding gem will result in our furred friends being freed, but the evil witch will make an appearance and interfere with the festivities whenever we get closer to reaching the goal. In keeping with the child-oriented nature of this Artec title, the showdown with the witch is more of a nuisance than a challenge, and the only penalty for receiving damage is the loss of a few keys and horseshoes, so just spam the action buttons until she's defeated and then cross the Rainbow Bridge to partake in the joyous conclusion celebration. Crystal's Ponytail is a bit of a departure from the typical suspects brought to the IUPG court, since it really doesn't have any significant flaws. There are some control issues, the frame rate is far from consistent, and the difficulty is laughable even on hard, but this was developed with the purpose of being a gateway for young female gamers, and in that regards, Crystal's Ponytail really isn't bad. If we were to judge Artec's creation against the Capcom and Konami masterpieces, it would be a miserable failure, but it's competently constructed in comparison to the Barney and Fisher-Price competition, so in that context and in that context alone, I feel it's totally fair to rule that the verdict is innocent! Before anyone flames me in the comments, I'm not saying that Crystal's Ponytail is great, nor am I saying it's better than the titles that have been deemed guilty in the past. All my verdict signifies is that Artec devised something that is decent by kid standards. You know, the Sesame Streets and Elmos. This actually feels like a game next to those, and it has a surprisingly stellar presentation that sets it a notch above the rest. I can't go as far as giving it a recommendation since it's super short and a very superficial experience overall, but there are much worse things to spend your money on, especially if you enjoy digging into the obscure oddities in the beloved console libraries of our youth. The pixelated adaptation of the Sylvester Stallone film franchise pummeled its way onto the Master System in 1987. Rocky takes the player through the chronological events of the saga, with the Italian stallion climbing up the circuits to square off against his 3 biggest rivals. The training segments that precede the bouts provide a sense of realism as they're used for building strength in preparation for the intense fights to follow. The types of training exercises vary from one fight to the next, but since the Master System is limited to a 2-button control scheme, the strategy for dealing with them remains largely unchanged. Mash 2 as fast as you can to reach the qualifying number of punches. The repeated button mashing becomes a workout in its own right, and it's certain to hurt after a while, but it's absolutely essential for having any sort of fighting chance with these iconic brutal bastards. The first up on the docket is Apollo Creed, and we're given a chance to rewrite history from the original movie by delivering a bombastic beating to knock his lights out. Creed puts up a good show, but he's quickly eliminated by, you guessed it, mashing 2 until he's down for the count. Upon Creed's defeat and the second assault on our digits, Clubber Lang takes to the ring and things start to get more serious. Lang's punches pack more of a wallop than Creed's, and I frequently found myself on the floor where I had to mash the buttons at a rapid pace to rise up and continue to get destroyed by Mr. T's fictional alter ego, but I eventually rebounded and unleashed a string of devastating body blows by mashing 2 while holding down on the D-pad to finally put Lang in its place. The last training segment is much trickier than the rest, and I performed quite poorly on initial inspection. Mickey holds up a pair of hand mitts, and we have to keep hitting them as he changes their positions. The basic mashing method remains the same, but I later figured out that left and right on the D-pad determines which hand makes contact, and I was soon able to overqualify for the match with Ivan Drago. In stark contrast to the previous heavyweights, Drago's punches are equivalent to a WMD, and I got my ass handed to me quicker than the brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Try as I might, I just couldn't overpower the blonde brute, so I single-handedly doomed Western civilization to die a miserable death by Soviet Russia. Nevertheless, Rocky for the Sega Master System has a lot of redeemable traits that make it worth checking out. The graphics are impressive by 8-bit standards, the music nicely complements the action, and the designers did a great job of respecting the source material. Punch-Out fans are certain to be disappointed since the gameplay shares more in common with track and field, but I personally enjoyed my time with it in spite of the constant hand trauma, and I rank this as one of the most underrated licensed titles, which is why I rule that the verdict is innocent! Rocky may not be a perfect adaptation, and there are plenty of boxing games that put it to shame, but it's undeniably one of the better Stallone tie-ins, and its quality is above average for the era. However, at a length of only 3 matches, it's probably not worth it for casual collectors, but anyone who considers themselves to be a die-hard Sega or Stallone enthusiast should definitely add a copy to your shelf. Crazy Bus is a 2004 Venezuelan tech demo that will haunt your dreams. It was apparently produced as a means of testing the creator's tools of the trade, and it's risen from these modest origins to become the stuff that creepy pastas are made of. There are a number of words that can be used to describe Crazy Bus. Nightmare is one, and colossal mind is another, but one thing's for sure, anyone who decides to embark on this virtual trip is in store for the bumpiest ride of their life. Upon loading the ROM, a series of DOS-like prompts will appear before the title screen pops up. The title screen is where Nightmare turns out to be the most apt descriptor, as it's accompanied by a piece of music, if you can call it that, which is, well, just give it a listen. I don't know what the hell that is, but I can tell you that my opinion of it is divided. There's a part of me, namely my brain, that's shattered into a million pieces at trying to comprehend how this came into existence, but the other half is strangely attracted to it. This isn't music, it's chaos. Chaos that's simultaneously beautiful and disgusting. The tones are so unnerving, and my skin is crawling at the mere thought of it, but I can't help but marvel at its sheer randomness. If I were a horror director, I'd be sure to use this in one of my flicks, as it would disturb everyone in the audience, and that is the highest compliment I can pay this discordant ditty. The notorious title screen theme is like nails on a chalkboard cranked to 11 through 4 stacks of Marshall amps, but the rest of the experience is only mildly eccentric. We get to choose from 1 out of 5 buses in order to partake in said excursion, with Spanish text listing the differing technical specs, and once a selection is made, the menu transitions to the mean streets of Venezuela, where we discover that the supposedly wacky journey is ultimately rather pedestrian. The controls in goal are simple. Hold left or right to reverse or go forward, and that's it. There's a mileage meter at the bottom that will increase or decrease depending on which direction we travel, and we can hold A to brake for some reason. But there's only one infinitely repeating screen, and the buses themselves are radically different from how they're depicted on the menu. This is madness. It boggles my mind to even attempt to imagine how this came into being. If the developer was being completely genuine in their intentions, then they should be institutionalized, since their mental stability is clearly off the rails. But if this is all just one massive prank committed by a troll, the likes of which the internet has never seen before, then I'd have to salute them for punking us all in such a unique manner. As the probability of the latter being the case is slim to none, I'm going to have to base the outcome of this trial on the assumption that Crazy Bus was created by an individual with a relatively stable degree of sanity, and they somehow came up with this chaotic mess. To put it another way, anonymous programmer, you're going to get the help that you need in prison, because Crazy Bus is guilty beyond the shadow of a doubt. I'll admit that I admire the Crazy Bus creator for coming up with an idea so crazy, and I'd go as far as calling that dissonant tune a guilty pleasure, but neither that or its unreleased free download status excuses the fact that this has assaulted the senses of countless gamers across the globe, so it must pay for its horrendous crimes. Crazy Bus is one wild ride that will drive anyone who dares to take the trip to madness, so I'd strongly suggest staying far away from this freak of nature to preserve your sanity. Alf was one of the most beloved sitcom stars of the 1980s, so it's no surprise that there was a video game tie-in based on the show of the same name for the Sega Master System. The wet behind the ears PC programmer Nexa was placed in the unenviable position of translating the popular property into a console adventure, and their subsequent absence speaks volumes for the impact it made on their careers. In spite of their perceived failure, Nexa successfully captured the vibe of the series and mirrored the main story thread of the stranded alien's attempts to repair his ship and return to his friends in space. This is accomplished by gathering all of the required pieces scattered around the earthly environment, which sounds simple enough in theory, but the reality is sure to test the patience of even the most hardcore challenge junkies. Alf's grand voyage begins at the exterior of his adopted home. His scooter is docked on the roof, and climbing up the ladder to board it reveals that it's out of gas. The fuel pellet is found in the cave adjacent to the basement, but there are a few mandatory boxes to check off the list before it can be retrieved. Step 1. Enter the house and snatch the cat on the island. The cat can hilariously be sold at the nearby store in exchange for a single buck, but the feline's intended purpose is to chase off the rodent in the basement so that we may traverse into the dank, dark, bat-filled terrain. The bats are one of Alf's biggest obstructions, and I was initially clueless as to how I was supposed to get by them without suffering a string of one-hit deaths, but I later discovered that there's a weapon to wipe out this winged menace, and it's obtained in the refrigerator of all places. In my haste to flee the mysterious suited figures in the kitchen, I walk past the cold storage container of the ticket to my survival, aka a stick of salami. As with the majority of Alf's action commands, the salami stick is swung by pressing 2, and get ready to exercise that digit as much as you can, since the hitbox for the attacks are extremely tight. The bats always move in the same zigzag pattern, but the consistency in which they appear is highly erratic, so it's best to just take it slow and mash 2 to keep them at bay until the shack with the gold nugget is reached. The gold nugget burns the metaphorical hole in the Alfer's pocket, and the only remedy is a trip to the local plaza to purchase the key. There are two businesses in town that Alf has to make transactions with, and they're both accessed on the same stretch of land by exiting the back door of the house or making a right on the start screen. This shopping expedition is far from a casual stroll, as there are mad motorists clogging up the roads and creepy stalkers lining the sidewalks. The store's become a frequent haunt of the Alfster in his quest to hang out with his compadres, so be prepared to get a true test of your dodging and weaving skills to avoid becoming a furry pancake. Anyway, the key is somehow necessary to open a door in Alf's own house to fetch the swimsuit. The swimsuit allows the comical protagonist to jump into the body of water just off the living room where he'll find some buried treasure. The underwater segment is a hassle and a half, and it's filled to the brim with fish and harpooning divers waiting to turn the titular alien into their catch of the day. If you manage to survive this aquatic assault, there's an oyster at the bottom with a bountiful pearl in its possession. Snatch it when its mouth is open and either die or return to the surface for another shopping trip. Buy the lantern from the Five and Dime and sell the pearl, then pick up the ladder from the general store. Go back to the basement with the new toys and then carefully proceed to the next shack for the fuel pellet. With that completed, it's time to blow this popsicle stand and travel to Mars for the reunion with Skip and Rhonda. Hold 1 to accelerate while being mindful of the passing planes, and make a temporary layover at the outpost to acquire the spacesuit. From here on out, there is only one more hurdle to overcome, but it's a doozy. Alf's upwards trajectory is impeded by falling asteroids and UFOs that will wreak havoc on our limited life meter, but I persevered and finished the domesticated alien's journey, receiving an inadequate blink and you'll miss it end screen as thanks for my efforts. It should be perfectly clear by now that Alf for the Master System is complicated to its core. There's very little in the way of guidance, the frustrating difficulty is exaggerated by flawed controls, and the presentation is mediocre in comparison to similar entries from the era. Anyone who's played this despised offender will know that Alf sets a record for awfulness in audio design in that there isn't a single sound effect to be heard from start to finish. I've brought a lot of broken messes into this courtroom, but I can't think of one that failed to include sound effects. Even Action 52, the mother of all NES catastrophes, has sound effects, so that's some pretty damning evidence against this licensed abomination. With that said though, there are a number of reasons why the presentation turned out so poor. The small novice team working behind the scenes allegedly had a meager budget and a tight deadline to contend with. This would explain all of the development errors, and it shows that they did the best that they could given the stressful situation they were up against. There are a lot of clever concepts that are executed somewhat well, and it does a pretty good job of capturing the humorous tone of the source material. Master System Alf has some serious issues. That's undeniable, and I can fully understand why it's earned such a negative reputation, but in fulfilling my duty as the judge, jury, and potential executioner of this illustrious court, I have to factor in all of the evidence that's presented to me, and that last little nugget of trivia has weighed heavily on my conscience. If this had been the output of Nexus tinkering under ideal circumstances, then I would gladly drop my hammer on it with the full force of the law, but these rookies overcame adversities that few of their peers have had to face, and I applaud them for producing a finalized cartridge that isn't an entirely derailed train wreck, which is why I rule that the verdict is innocent. Call me crazy, but I had to go with my gut instinct, and it told me to give Nexa a reprieve. That, of course, doesn't mean that this is a hidden gem, and you definitely shouldn't go out of your way to try this out, especially since the prices for a physical copy have risen sky high in recent years. But all in all, Alf is far from the worst game I've featured on this series. The presentation may be primitive, but the music is of a respectable quality, and I particularly dig that cave tune. The scavenger hunt aspect can get tedious, but I appreciated the variety and how ridiculous it can get. For better or worse, Alph is an experience like no other, and most players are gonna want to stay as far away from it as possible, but those with quirky tastes will find plenty to sink their teeth into, and I'd suggest seeking out the ROM if you're even slightly curious. It's too weird not to miss. Dark Castle. Its name strikes fear deep into the hearts of Genesis owners, and with good reason. This loathsome port from Artec Studios mixes puzzle platforming elements with a strong gothic vibe to create a formula that sounds promising on paper, but the execution is problematic to say the very least. The intro screen is accompanied by an excellent chiptune rendition of a classical Bach piece that sets an appropriately spooky mood that segues into the Great Hall hub menu. The Great Hall contains 4 sections to choose from, each offering their own pitfalls and obstacles to overcome. Our shaggy-haired hero is armed with a supply of rocks that are dispatched with the C button, and pressing up or down on the D-pad adjusts the arc of his shot. As mentioned previously, Dark Castle is a puzzle platformer with the emphasis placed heavily on the latter genre, meaning that there are plenty of death-defying acrobatics to perform. Unfortunately, the earth-toned avatar we step into the virtual shoes of is a pathetic excuse for a side-scrolling star who gets dizzy at the drop of a hat and is about as nimble as an elephant in ballet slippers, so expect to die over and over again from attempting to leap onto ledges and climb up ropes. Over the course of my capture session, I was able to explore the majority of the treacherous dungeons thanks in large part to the stage select feature in the Great Hall, and I encountered an infinitely respawning horde of creatures ranging from rodentia of all shapes and sizes to masked maniacs and whatever the hell these are. My tolerance for bad games helped me to cope with this annoying onslaught for a while, but even I inevitably cracked under the pressure of this putrid port, and not even the hidden cheat menu was enough to get me to recommit to this devilish atrocity. I know I usually keep a neutral tone in these analyses, and I give 100% of my being to defending even the worst of offenders, but Dark Castle crosses into a whole new level of rancidness that's completely beyond redemption. The presentation is subpar by the standards of the era, with bland, underwhelming visuals, clunky controls, a soundtrack comprised of one looping song, and programming that's amateur at best. I have absolutely no idea how they messed up a simple port job so bad, and I'm further astonished by the fact that this crew would later go on to bring us Crystal's Ponytail. Say what you will about that game, but this makes it look like a masterpiece in comparison, and I'd rather be forced to play Crazy Bus for the rest of eternity in a locked rubber room than spend another second with this dreadful waste of plastic. So it's with great pleasure that I rule that Dark Castle is guilty of all charges. Artec Studios may have redeemed themselves in the wake of this disaster, and they surprisingly continued to work in the field into the 21st century, but that doesn't let them off the hook for their crimes against the gaming community, and I sentence them with the strictest possible punishment, which I'll enact in a future episode. In the meantime, please make sure that you never ever play this port of Dark Castle. Take my word for how truly terrible it is and save yourself from the torture. You'll thank me when you do. Anyway, that about wraps things up on this epic-length IUPG extravaganza. This is of course just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the stinkers in the Sega catalog, and I can promise right now that there will be a sequel and similar console-related videos at some point in the future, but for now, I need to slow down the pace with a basic Cygnus Destroyer review. Be sure to come back for that and leave any suggestions for potential trials in the comments below, but until then, court is now adjourned! Thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw and you want to see more, the boxes on the screen right now will lead to some more of my videos, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel by clicking on my avatar in the bottom right hand corner. Thanks again!